Teams are asking for a lot more, obviously, at that early date. Now, with less than a week to go, how have the dynamics shifted? How has the market changed?
I wouldn't say the market's changed drastically. I mean, it's definitely, as you get closer, like we are now, 4 days away, you start to get a little bit more, there's more phone calls, more frequency of check-ins from people. So it feels like there's some momentum building towards something happening in the industry, not necessarily with us, or it could be with us. So there's definitely a lot more action, is how I'd say that. As far as the prices go, yeah, there's a little bit more reasonableness about a certain level of player, but there's still also a lot of teams holding the prices very high on other types of players.
You had talked about wanting to reinforce the pitching staff. Obviously, you do that with the Rich Hill move. Do you still look at that, even with the move, as your top priority here in the next few days, or do you feel more comfortable with where you're at right now?
Well, adding Rich definitely helps, but still think we need to improve and just have more depth there. Obviously, we have some guys that we think are on the cusp of returning to the team that can make an impact, a positive impact for the club, but I know I've said this before, but with the deadline being, we don't have the August waiver period anymore, so we need to make sure we kind of put our best foot forward in terms of getting the most pitching depth that we can. There's still a focus on really upgrading the team in any way we can, adding more talent, really. Not so much upgrading as adding. So, exploring position players, relievers, really all the above.
Hi, Zach. I just wanted to follow up on what you just said, not so much upgrading as adding. Is that sort of a way of saying that you're not necessarily looking to make a bigger type splash regardless of where on the diamond it is, or is that still something that could be in your order of operations here?
Yeah, really exploring anything. I kind of just, say that it's more out of respect to our players, because I think we do have a lot of good players. So I don't want to, upgrading could be seemed pejorative, so that's why I didn't really want to put it that way as much as we're just trying to improve the team in any way that we can. So, yeah, I wouldn't read into that as you sit behind the interrogation light there that I can.
Tim Britton from The Athletic. How has the offense's performance since the All-Star break, in particular, with everyone back healthy, changed maybe how you feel about adding position players to the group?
Yeah, it's good to see some of the guys performing at their expected level, starting to show some improvements. Again, it doesn't really change. We always have to be exploring ways to improve the club. So, but as I've said before, we have a lot of good position players. So we're mindful of, if we add a player, it's a zero-sum game here. We're taking away at bats from someone else, and we need to make sure that's actually improving our club, depending on the acquisition cost.
Hey, Zach, I'll stand. Ken Davidoff, New York Post. Thinking of someone specifically, but asking generally, what sort of hurdles do you view as dealing within your division and dealing with players who have no trade clauses?
I don't have any problem dealing within our division. Some other teams may feel differently. I have no idea, but I always just we have to look at what's best for the club, both short and long term, and sometimes dealing within the division is a way to do that. There are times, I've had experiences in my past where I've seen teams within the same division have kind of an in-division tax associated with a trade. It's not clear whether that is the case now. I wouldn't be surprised if it is for some players, but there's nothing, I don't think we should be afraid to make moves that improve our club.
And then a player with full no trade protection.
Yeah, I mean, that adds a variable that can complicate things at times. It definitely affects the timeline, because you have to build in time to deal with that. There's usually a conversation that the club has, the club that the player currently is with needs to have with them about what it would take to waive that. So for any player that has no trade protection, that's an issue that we need to be mindful of, that could be a challenge. In some cases, I've already had conversations where you don't have to go too far down the road before you know that they're just not going to waive it, and so we don't spend much time on it.
Tim Healy from Newsday. When you think about your rotation depth, some of the guys who could come back from injury, how much can you expect from Jacob deGrom, the way his season has unfolded?
I mean, I expect Jacob to continue to positively impact the club. He's obviously, he's had a few things here and there. All of them have been fairly short term. Don't expect this one to be different. Fully expect him to come back and make a positive impact on the club the rest of the way.
And with Lindor, how long do you anticipate him being out?
It's not really different than what I think I've talked about before, which is, typically you expect around 4 to 6 weeks from the time of the injury, of that type of injury. So I don't know, what's it been, a week or so? So, in the 3 to 5 week type of area.
Thank you.
Sure. I wouldn't say feel pressure as much as, recognize that you have a 5-game series against a team that is right behind you, that could swing some things depending if you have a very good series or not a good series. So it's important. I'm not that focused on that part of it, but I do think, the reality is that could lead to that club to take a different approach depending on how things go. So, yeah, that's definitely something that I'm aware of.
Howie Rose, Mets Radio. Zach, can you characterize what you could possibly expect, if anything, from Noah Syndergaard this year? And at this point, if he does come back, will it just be gravy? Do you have him pigeonholed either as someone who would start a game potentially or maybe help you most out of the bullpen?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to crystal ball that right now. I'd say, someone of the quality of Noah Syndergaard can help us in different capacities. So if that's a reliever, if that's a starter, I mean, I'd be thrilled with just having him and having that arm available to get important outs. I think the game's evolved over the last several years into focusing more on how many outs you can get, piecing things together to get through 27 outs in a game. And he could definitely be a big part of that. It's hard to say what exactly he'll be. I honestly operate with more of the, because I think it's prudent for me to think this way, that, let's assume that he's not here as we make decisions, especially in a week like right now, because we won't have enough information. So let's assume that he's not, and if he is, which, he expects to be, and we do expect him to, we're projecting him to come back, that would be another impact arm coming back, which would be great. But if we operate as though we assume he doesn't, we're going to be better off that, making decisions that way.
Wayne Randazzo, Mets Radio. Zach, do you look at the trade deadline as a way to improve your team just to win the division and get to the playoffs, or do you make a deal with an eye toward trying to get to the World Series and win a World Series? How do you kind of weigh the two when you make a trade?
Yeah, I think you're always thinking of both. I don't think there's, a clear criteria for, how do you make the team not just a postseason contender, but a champion, get a championship winner. It's hard to clearly define that. So we really need to just focus on how we make the team better, and that's going to help our odds of winning a championship. So, but that's the goal. So we're always thinking that way too, is, how does this team look come October? We want to get there because that's the first step. And then, once we're there, what does our team look like that's a little different than maybe a regular season team just because of the way the postseason works? And so definitely have to think about both ways.
Justin Toscano, Bergen Record. Zach, as you guys are in a position to add, if you're theoretically in on the same player as maybe other contending teams, how do you go about perhaps positioning yourself as a better trade partner than those teams?
Well, I mean, it's tough. You have to match up right. It takes two to get to a deal. So a lot of it depends on how they see the players that we have that we might be willing to move. And so sometimes it's completely out of your control, and the other team doesn't value your prospects at the level that it would take to get a deal done, and the other teams, they do value those prospects. And we can't, short of just, going to a higher level of prospect that puts your future at a higher risk, it's hard to do that. I don't think you want to ever be in a position where you feel like you have to, do a single move at all costs. We have to, as I've always said, we have to be smart about this and try to improve the club while not completely hurting our future. I know that there's always going to be some moves that are going to hurt a little bit, but it's all just a matter of degree.
And then do you have an update on Kumar Rocker's situation?
I'm not going to comment on any drafted players. As you guys know, there's an August 1st signing deadline. Our plan is to address all 20 players' situations at that time, so we're not going to comment on any individual one of them right now.
Disha Thosar, New York Daily News. I guess, do you just have a timeline or a return date yet for Carlos Carrasco?
Well, Carlos pitched really well in his outing yesterday, and so we're encouraged by that. I think we need to have some conversations with our medical staff, with our coaching staff, with Carlos about what the next steps are, but I think there's a decent chance that he'll be with the club soon.
And I know you said you were kind of looking to improve anywhere and everywhere, but how much has your attention maybe shifted to the bullpen and adding a reliever to that unit more so than the last time we spoke to you, given how taxed the pitching staff has been as a whole?
I wouldn't say focus has shifted at all. I mean, it's always been talking about all sorts of different ways to improve the club. So, the last time we spoke, it was the priorities of starting rotation. I don't think that's really changed, because I think I've said this before too, the fastest way for things to fall apart is to have your starting rotation not pitch to their capabilities, or to have a lot of injuries that lead to that falling apart. And unfortunately, I've experienced that in the past, where it seems like you're always down 3-0 when you're coming to bat for the first time, or early in the game, and it's hard to dig out of those holes. So we definitely want to shore things up so we feel like we have a chance to compete and win every game.
Rich Catino, ESPN Radio. When you're thinking about trades, particularly this week, and there are rental players out there, and then there are players that you have some control beyond these months of the season, is there a priority to bring in players that you have more control down the road, knowing that that could cost more heavy prospects in a deal?
Sure. I think we take it on a case-by-case basis. So there's some kind of rental fits that may fit better because of the acquisition cost. But anytime you can acquire a player with more control, that helps not only this team, but the future teams. It could be worth the extra cost. It's just gauging. It's case by case, because some teams will, it's always a sliding scale for how they're valuing those extra years of control, and some teams will be pricing that out at a much higher point than some others, and so you got to still take it on a case by case basis.
Mark Roseman, Sports Talk New York. This team has accomplished a lot based on the chemistry of the team. When weighing some of the trades that are potentially out there, how much do you weigh the clubhouse and what that particular player brings in the clubhouse as well?
Yeah, I agree with you that that's been an important part of this team, and I'm, building, putting together this team in the off season. That was a big focus. Obviously, we're trying to put the best players on the field, but the clubhouse culture was really an important focus. So that remains the case, and I've already had plenty of conversations with Louis about, if we did certain things, how do we think that would be received by the clubhouse, and more broadly rather than specific players. But we always have to do our due diligence in making sure we understand not just the kind of player that we're bringing, but the kind of person, because I do think it's important. And what we do have in the clubhouse has been pretty special, and we want to keep that going or even add to it.
And secondly, you mentioned the procedure or your mindset with Noah, figuring that he's not going to be here. With Francisco Lindor, would you consider maybe bringing in a shortstop that has versatility to move to another position, just in case Francisco comes back or doesn't come back?
Sure, yeah, we're open-minded to that. I mean, I fully expect Francisco to come back and be our shortstop. in the meantime, I think we have some decent options to help us win in the short term. But yeah, open-minded to if there are other options that could also, like you said, have versatility to help us when Francisco does come back. Those are things we'd explore as well.
Zach, Dave London, Newsday. Zach, you seem to be kind of in a weird spot with having 3 top-of-the-rotation starters that are kind of different degrees of being physically ready to pitch. I mean, I know your expectation is Carrasco and deGrom to be back, Syndergaard not as much, but at the same time, there's still kind of question marks. Is that hard to gauge about what to do, about what kind of starter to bring in here, or how many, or I mean, how do you measure that against what you guys might need?
It's definitely part of the conversation. You know, trying to navigate in a world with some uncertainty about the timing of when guys are coming back, and you know what's their capability both in the short and long term. Sure, that's all part of the conversation. You know, managing the roster with if you're talking about multiple acquisitions, you know, what happens when guys come back, and you have, you know, how does that affect your bullpen if you're moving someone into the bullpen, or are we doing piggybacks with multiple guys in a single rotation slot, things like that. There's all options are open. We're talking through all those things. So yeah, anytime you have to kind of look at the puzzle in different ways, it adds kind of time and maybe complicates things a little bit. But I'm confident that we will be able to navigate through that uncertainty this week.
Tim Healy from Newsday. How confident are you that you will make a trade of some sort between now and the trade deadline?
Well, things change fast, so it's hard to gauge. It's hard to put a confidence level, but you know, I expect we're doing enough exploring, have enough dialogue that there'll be good opportunities for us. But like I said, it's not, when you're trying to acquire players from another team, it's not quite in our control. I don't have a view into what else they're talking about with other clubs. Sometimes things change as time goes on, and someone else comes off the board that impacts how a team may value a certain player. So there's all those dynamics are in play, so it's really hard to handicap.
And are you looking to potentially add anybody from the outside for that start tomorrow, or is that going to be an in-house person?
I mean, at this time, it's hard to realistically bring in someone from the outside. So I think we need to think through kind of our internal options. But there's some chance of it. I just, you know, logistically, it's getting harder as time goes by.
Howie Rose, Mets Radio. Zach, as you look at the market globally, apart from just your team, as much as there's always been a premium on starting pitching, when you look at the plethora of injuries that starting pitchers, all pitchers, have dealt with over the last couple of years, is the market displaying to you that that premium is still what it's always been, and is the price for a controllable, real good, solid starting pitcher as exorbitant as it's always been? Or are teams starting to rethink that at all in the wake of all of the injuries that have befallen these pitchers?
I think my sense is the industry, the people that have the pitchers that could be traded are, you know, based on where the prices are at, I'd say they're looking at this more as an opportunity because there are so many more injuries that you have more buyers, and so it becomes a better seller's market, which then drives prices up. I feel like that's kind of driving behavior more than the risk of holding on to that pitcher and there being an injury to that particular pitcher. I think that part of it doesn't seem to be affecting the market. All right, thank you guys.